Good morning. My name is Dustin Petz. I have the joy of serving as the president of the Kansas Area United Methodist Foundation, and I welcome you here to our Learn and Grow seminar on narrative budgets. It's a great joy to have you with us today. Thank you. Will you please join with me in a time of prayer? Gracious God, we give you thanks for this day, for your grace. We pray for your strength as we continue in the midst of this pandemic, as we do our ministries that we've been called to be about this fall. We pray also that you'll help us to dream dreams and to see visions about how you seek to use us through the life of the church to make a difference, to make disciples of Jesus Christ and to transform the world around us. God, we give you thanks for the resources you've entrusted to us personally and to the church. We pray that you'll help us to be good stewards of those and use them to further the work and ministry of your kingdom and of the work of the church. Pour out your Spirit upon our presenter and upon our time together today. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. It's my joy to have Frederick Douglass Powe Jr. As our presenter today for this narrative budget seminar. He's the director of the Lewis Center for Church Leadership and the James C. Logan Professor of Evangelism at Wesley Theological Seminary. Dr. Powe is an ordained elder in the Baltimore, Washington Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church. He has authored many different books, and his newest one is called The Adept Church, Navigating Between a Rock and a Hard Place, which was the #1 newly released church growth book just a month before being released. Dr. Powe holds a PhD in systematic theology from Emory University, a Master's of Divinity from Candler School of Theology, and a Bachelor of Arts from Ohio Wesleyan University. Doug, we welcome you. Thank you so much for being here today. We hear you gladly.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation and the introduction, and also a thank you to Joanna. I am going to share my screen and get ready to go here and talk about narrative budget. It's my plan to sort of in a couple of places to give you some time to think and reflect upon your own church, but for the most part, the idea is to save most of the questions for closer to the end of the presentation. So please put them in the chat, but there will be some time to at least reflect upon your own church and some of the ideas being presented. I want to begin sort of with what we would call a traditional budget, or what I would call a traditional budget. And a traditional church budget is critically important. And in most cases, what we do in congregation is categorize things in line items so that you have pastor salary, musician salary, it may be children's ministry, it could be senior adult ministry. So you have these different line item categories that create the budget that that you have, and of course your income and your expenses have to match one another. Interestingly enough, even though we're talking about narrative budgets today, one of the biggest complaints about seminaries in general is we actually don't teach students how to even do a line item budget in most seminaries. But as you know, as a pastor, being able to create a line item budget is critically important for the work that you're doing. So this is sort of the traditional budget that most congregations work with and use and share with people. And what you're sharing in a traditional budget is typically income and expenses. If you get into finance committee, you may be sharing where you're underspending and overspending in particular categories. And of course, hopefully you're sharing the sources of income, be it through giving, endowment, or other places where income may occur. One of the challenges with a traditional budget and doing the line item is that you can get stuck in the weeds. And what I mean by this is when you're creating the budget or when you're sharing the budget and you go and you're talking with the finance committee or even a larger committee, and you say, we're going to have $5,000 in the budget for the children's ministry, and we're going to have $2,500 for the senior adult ministry. You know that someone in the senior adult ministry is going to get upset and say, well, why is it that they get $5,000 and we get $2,500? So that when they see the actual line items, people get stuck on the amount of money in that line item, and it's hard to move them forward beyond thinking about a particular line item, and they miss the whole concept of doing ministry itself. So part of getting stuck in the weeds is people really focus on each particular line item, and is that the right amount of money, or should it be more, should it be less, or should I get more, should I get less? So these are some of the things that occur when we use line item budgets. And what's missing from this picture is sort of the impact. How is the giving transforming our lives? What difference is the giving making to the work that we are doing? How are we fulfilling our mission? And I'll come back to that here in just a bit. What we really are wanting to help people to see, hopefully or prayerfully, is what is the impact we're having in the community? Why is it that you should become a part of our faith community? So that what is missing from this is sort of the evangelistic opportunity of sharing how our giving is actually making a difference in terms of just beyond just the church community, but the broader community that can draw other people to want to participate. And sort of in-kind and human resources. So one of the critical pieces of a church community is there are a lot of volunteers in a church community, people who are freely giving of their time to help a ministry to operate. And that is not captured in a line item budget that in most cases, we just take for granted when people are doing that, or when people are giving in kind, we take that for granted. So that's not being captured again in a line item budget. So these things are all missing when you are typically using a line item budget. One of the things we want to think about in telling our story, our narrative, and this is where mission is critically important, is how does the budget reflect our mission? How is it that, in our particular congregation, we're trying to live out this gospel story? And if we use a mission that's simple, I'm going to use 3 C's: celebrate, connect, and care. Then the question becomes, how do we build a budget that really helps people to understand how we are celebrating? How are we connecting with others, and how are we caring for others? So that the story that we're building with the budget really should help people to really point to our mission and understand how our mission is being lived out and the impact that mission is having, not only on the faith community that we are calling the church, but the broader community as a whole in terms of what we're trying to do. So what is missing is helping to paint that picture of the mission and how that is really being lived out in a significant way. So thinking about a narrative budget really helps you to tell a story. The point of a narrative budget is to help you to paint a picture about what it is that you are up to and the work that is taking place in a way that moves people away from simply focusing on 5,000 for this ministry, 2,500 for this ministry. If we go to the gospel story itself, one of my favorite stories is the story of the Good Samaritan. And if you think about Jesus, it's interesting. It's that Jesus uses parables, which are a form of story, that when he is trying to illustrate something or he's trying to share something, he typically shares it with a story. And the Good Samaritan is a great example. In the Good Samaritan in Luke chapter 10, verses 25 to 37, you have a lawyer who's questioning Jesus about sort of the meaning of loving God and loving your neighbor. And ultimately, the question is, who is my neighbor? And of course, Jesus could answer this question straight on and, say your neighbor is this person, your neighbor is the Good Samaritan, your neighbor is this, and, these are your neighbors. But Jesus doesn't answer in that way. What Jesus does, of course, is tell the story about someone who's traveling along the road, falls upon robbers, that a priest comes by, a Levite comes by, and a Samaritan comes by, and it's the Samaritan that actually helps the individual. So in telling the story in this way, what Jesus has done is really unpack for the audience what the impact is of the Good Samaritan being their neighbor. He has helped them to see and paint a picture of what it looks like to be a neighbor, and that we can be surprised by who that person can actually be. So a narrative budget does the same thing as that parable. A narrative budget unpacks for people this story or this picture of what is taking place. If we, and I want to step outside of the church for a second. If we think about animal shelter and an animal shelter, sort of using church language, needing donations, time from people, talent, and that sort of thing, and they wanted to tell a story, a shelter could simply go out and say, hey, we need you all to donate, $50 each to help support the shelter. And if you could come and spend, 5 hours a week with the animals to help out, that would be fantastic. That would be one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is hopefully what I'm going to be able to show you here, if we get the work.
It does.
Oh, it was working.
Doesn't matter what shelter you're in, how nice it is, how not nice it is. These guys go through depression, fatigue, mental fatigue. And those are the ones that I want to get out of there and get into my house. Every single night, I find a different dog from a different shelter and I bring him home just to give him a night away from that environment. Hey guys, what's going on? How are you, pal? I spent the first 20 years of my life living in a world where all I wanted to do was get stuff. What can Scott get? How much money can Scott make? 10 years ago, almost to the day, I realized that it's not about what I can get, it's about what I can give. That was a powerful moment in my life. Hey guys, I'm hanging out with my girlfriend Amelia today from the animal shelter. She was having kind of a bad morning, so I decided to get her out of the shelter, take her for a long car ride, and we're wrapping the day up with a little bit of ice cream. Sharing my post on social media is helping animal rescue. When I place an animal, I don't even think that I can describe the feeling, to be perfectly honest with you. It's a feeling of relief. I get to exhale, I get to relax. It's emotional. You know what I mean? There's no way around it. It's absolutely emotional. Not everybody can volunteer, not everybody can donate, and not everybody can adopt. Even the smallest act will go a very long way. When you care enough to help animals, you can change the world.
When we look at that video, we see a story of someone who is giving of their sort of time and their talent, and we can assume possibly even their time to make a difference. And he could have simply come on and stated, hey, this is what I'm doing. But the way that they tell the story, they tell it in a narrative form to help us think about it and paint a picture and draw us in differently. And it has a much greater impact on sharing what is taking place in terms of helping the shelter than if they simply had tried to communicate that same thing using sort of a line item budget. So the key of what we're really trying to do is to paint this picture, to paint this story, to help people see what is taking place. So that is what is critically important. I want to pause here just for a second for you all, and we can't take a lot of time, but I want you to think about at your own congregation sort of what is not being shared right now in terms of the impact of your budget. What is it that is missing? It could be that you're missing sort of volunteers, the people who are giving freely of themselves, and how would you want to think about sharing that story? It could be people give in-kind gifts to the church. An example of this could be Sister Pauline, who brings the donuts every Sunday for coffee hour, but doesn't turn into receipts to the church. So she's giving an in-kind donation to the church by bringing the donuts every Sunday. That makes a difference in the sort of fellowship of the church. So think about, just for a couple of minutes, those things that are missing that you want to lift up and share as part of the story of the church as you fulfill your mission. And I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that, and then we'll come back and dig into how you get started in building a narrative budget. So take a couple of minutes. All right. I know that was not a lot of time, but hopefully it gave you a chance to begin thinking about sort of what is missing and what you would like to share as you think about a narrative budget. So let's talk about sort of some pieces of putting together a narrative budget. What you're really working on is reframing the way people are going to engage the budget. Now, let me say up front that you're not doing away with the line item budget. You're going to still need that. The finance committee, or we'll call it sort of the people who are constructing eventually what will be the narrative budget, have to start with the line item budget. So that is still critically important. So it's not going away. But the sort of budget that you're sharing with the congregation as a whole, and even possibly with the community, is going to be the narrative budget that is built off of that line item budget. So you're reframing the way that people are going to engage your budget. What you want to do, or I shouldn't say what you want to do, one way of going about it is to pick 5 or 6 categories. Another way to do it is what I talked about earlier, is think about it in terms of your mission, and you could actually use something like Celebrate, Connect, and Care, and do it simply in sort of those 3 categories. In this case, I'm going to talk about it, though, if you're picking 5 or 6 categories like worship, fellowship, mission, Christian formation. These are categories that are straightforward, easy for people to understand, and they're going to be easy to fit pretty much anything that you're going to cover in terms of your current line item budget into these categories. What is critical is you should not, I will say this again, you should not have a category called administration. Now, the administration costs are going to be spread out over these 5 or 6 categories. So that's part of the reason you still need the line item budget. So you're going to have to basically convert those administrative costs and fit them into one of these line item budgets. And we'll talk a little bit about that process. But you should not have a category called administration. That is going to go away. So what you are doing then is allocating the percentage from the line item to your new categories. So we'll start off with something like the choir. So the choir could fit 100% in worship. That would make sense because that's where the choir typically would, be utilized, would be in the worship service. You could think of something like coffee hour, which could be 80% fellowship, but it also might be for some congregations a missional activity where you invite people who might visit for Bible study or visit for worship to attract them to come and have a conversation with the pastor or other people. So it might fall 80% under the fellowship category and 20% under the mission category is the way you would allocate something of that nature. Community meals. So community meals, of course, could be 70% mission and possibly 30% Christian formation, because the goal may be the meals are mainly for people outside of the church, where you're sharing and helping to engage people, but it also may be for your studies, particularly in pre-pandemic times, that you would have meal while you had Bible study on Wednesday evening. So you would allocate 70% towards the mission and 30% towards Christian formation. As you think about, something like utilities, it could go and be 50% towards worship, 30% towards Christian formation, and 20% towards mission. So here the idea is to think about, as we think about our utilities, when is our greatest use of utilities, and to put it in that category. And then we know we also use it because the building is open on Wednesday. And then we know we also use it because we have this food giveaway on Saturday. So you're allocating in a way where the utilities are being spread out again over these same categories, but reflected in, where the percentage of their use would go. And of course, if you think of the pastor's time could probably hit all the categories. I just did 3 of the categories here, but you're taking again what the pastor is being paid and not thinking of it as a line item, but the pastor is participating in worship. The pastor is participating in Christian formation. The pastor is participating in mission. So what the narrative budget is doing is taking those line items and is allocating it over these 5 or 6 categories, so that you now are able to fit everything, including administrative costs, utilities, into these categories that are no longer showing up as simply a line item budget. What this does for you then is it creates the ability now to tell a story when you do it in this manner. So that as I look at, in this particular case, fellowship, mission, education, and worship, and I'll break these down more, I can now point to and say, this amount of our budget is going to go to fellowship. This amount of our budget is going to go towards education. This amount is going for worship, and this amount is going for mission. So that all of the costs and expenses are there, but they're now there in a way that tells a very different story than if you simply set it up as a line item budget. They're there in a way that you're going to be able to help people to understand the story of how that money will impact the community and the congregation. And let me give a few examples of that. So if we were talking about worship, one way that you could tell the story would be talking about how we expanded worship this year to include virtual participation. And what we have is this story from Paul, who's no longer able to drive, but has just been able to participate in worship now because it's virtual, and how this has changed his life. So that story can be told in a picture form and with a little snippet from Paul sharing this information that completely changes the way you are sharing the worship budget. Instead of saying we're spending this amount on worship this year, now you have this picture of Paul talking about how this has changed his life, and you're able to say this is the impact we're having in worship. As you think about mission, you could talk about how you partner with ABC Community Center and we're serving children after school. And you can have the pictures, of course, when you're talking about children, you got to have permission for pictures, but sharing again, this is the impact we're having with our mission. And this is why this part of the budget is so important. Look at the difference we're making in our community. And the pictures illustrate that difference for you and what you're doing. Christian formation. You could talk about how you started a small group in the Lambert's home and how they have connected with their neighbors, and their neighbors are now a part of this. And this is an entree, hopefully, into the congregation for them. So again, you're telling a story, even with a picture of the Lamberts in the small group in their house, that looks very different than if you just had a line item that said Christian education or Christian formation. And for fellowship, again, you're telling a story, and it might be a picture of Miss Pauline bringing her donuts in and, giving freely and seeing this as her ministry and not charging the church and wanting to make sure that everybody has the donuts on Sunday. But again, it's telling this story. So what the narrative budget does is it allows you to translate what is taking place in the church and put it in this form that tells a story that sort of unpacks the impact that you are having not only in the church community, but also in the broader community. And it moves people away from simply focusing on a line item. So going back to where we started earlier, now you move away from, having the children's ministry and the senior adult ministry fighting over 5,000 to 2,500, because you have this category of mission in general where you show the impact that both ministries are having. So they're not as concerned about what their budget is. What they see is, wow, look at what these ministries did this year. And that's what you're really after. I want to share, and we're going to have plenty of time for some questions, conversation, but sort of want to share just one congregation in a way they put together their narrative budget. And they did it in simple format. You're going to see with the next slide, a total of about 4 pages. And what they did is to basically set it up as with Jesus as the foundation. And on that foundation, you have share, serve, grow, connect, and celebrate. And for each one of those categories, what they have is the amount that's being spent in sharing, and they do a little pie picture chart of what is being shared in terms of the budget. They have the pictures of, illustrating where that sharing is taking place. And then they go to serve and they do the same thing. This is how we're serving. And again, they show the breakdown with the pie chart and the picture of what is taking place. Then they talk about this is how we're growing, and they're doing the same thing. This is what we're spending overall. This is the breakdown. They even have the picture of the life groups of illustrating of, where studies taking place, but it's the same thing. What they've done with doing the budget in this way compared to where we started with the line item budget is they have illustrated how the money is being spent so that you end up in the same place in terms of overall budget expenditure. But the way they are communicating the way the money's being spent is very different than if I'm simply looking at each individual line item and what that costs. This is telling me a story of how Jesus is our foundation and the ways we're living out our mission by sharing, serving, growing, connecting, and celebrating, and the work we're doing to make that happen, versus if I just hand you a sheet and say, hey, this is our budget for this year, let's approve it and let's move on. I am not going to lie to you. It takes work to do a narrative budget because you have to, of course, translate the line item budget to tell the story. So that means you have a small group of people who are going to have to take more time to do that work of translation to make it happen. And you need somebody who, of course, is willing to either share pictures and to put together something that can be presented to the congregation to illustrate it in a format of this nature or another nature. So it does take work to do a narrative budget, but I believe the payoff, is huge compared to just simply doing a line item budget. That when you illustrate it in this way, it makes a tremendous difference for the church. I am going to stop there and come back and take questions from the chat or other questions that others may have related to constructing a narrative budget.
One that has been given to us already that we'd like you to address is, how does one set the distribution percentages for things like church insurance and mission shares, apportionments, as United Methodist churches?
Yeah, mission shares, I think, is a little bit easier because you can really spread that out over an example I use. Certainly, mission category, you can think about it. I think in terms of even fellowship and some other things, because the impact of it sort of goes across all of those categories. So that one, I believe, is a little bit easier to spread out. When it comes to the insurance, there, of course, you're doing a little bit more work, sort of like the utilities. So what you're trying to figure out is, we use the building mainly on Wednesdays and Sundays. So we're going to spread it out over worship, and we're going to spread it out over Christian formation. So for some of it, it's not going to be a perfect sort of thing, but as long as you have the complete amount and and your reasoning for how you spread it out is what is critically important, you're still going to end up in the same place. But that is sort of how I would think about it.
I could think there would be times when someone would get so focused on getting it perfect that they don't get it done, and to be able to tell a story. And so the encouragement of not trying to get it so specific. You're trying to get pretty big ballparks so that you can tell that story.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And that's part of Oh, I'm sorry. And that's part of the reason you want to really limit yourself to 5 or 6 categories, or like I said, the other way is thinking about it with the 3 C's. And because in that sense, then you have these broad categories that are broad enough to capture even something like insurance. Because if you think about insurance, it would fit under all of those C's and what you're trying to do. So you can allocate it basically 33 and a third for each one of them. So the goal is not to get trapped into, like Dustin is saying, perfection, but the goal is to help you to express how you want to share the story of what the impact of the church.
Thank you. The next question is, what's the best timing as far as communicating the narrative budget relative to the fiscal year? More as a recap or more in the way of goals for the coming year? What are your thoughts?
I have seen it done as both. I think that it helps in terms of goals for the coming year. And that when people see that you're making a difference and that their money that you're giving is making a difference, it encourages them to say, hey, we can step up to the plate and possibly even do more. One of the things, and Dustin knows this, that is absolutely true with sort of younger generations is younger generations don't support sort of administrative cost and building cost and things of that nature, but they do support things like mission and things of that nature. So when you're trying to connect with younger people, this sort of narrative budget helps you to tell a story that would help them to actually give. So again, in that sort of way, I think it helps then in terms of setting the goal to say, hey, this is what we're doing and why you should support us versus sort of your strict line item budget. It actually, particularly for some younger generations, changes the way they see the work of the church as a whole.
I'm going to combine a couple questions. It seems like doing this extra effort to take your line item budget and making the narrative budget format, really, it has a pretty significant impact. I would think it increases the giving and it increases the passion for people to support the ministry and the work of the church in knowing the actual people and the actual outcomes of the deployment of dollars in the church ministry. Are there other outcomes, or tell us about the outcomes and impact of this and how it relates to stewardship?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and we've talked some about this, but I think a couple of things, repeating a few things that were mentioned and a couple new ones. One is that when you're doing this, what it means is you have to actually pay attention to who's volunteering, who's doing in-kind things that are supporting the church so you can tell those stories. So it does help you to become more aware of what is taking place in the life of the congregation in that way, which of course, aside from the budget, helps you to recognize the efforts of those individuals and what they're doing. Next, I would say what it does is it helps you in terms of when you are trying to do sort of a special project or raise money for something special, it doesn't become this sort of, we're trying to get a new church van, but we are working on a way to help to transport the after-school children so that they can safely make it to the church for the work that we're going to be doing with them. So it allows you to alter the way you even think about fundraising in terms of when you're doing those special projects. And the next, I think that I would say is it really allows you in the way that we presented it, we sort of presented and highlighted all of them sort of equally. But another way to think about it is you could really highlight one each year. So one year you could focus on worship. It's not that you're ignoring the other, but it really, if the goal is, we know that in this world we live in today, what we really are going to have to do is to think about getting new equipment that is going to allow us to stream our worship service. It allows you to highlight worship in a way, again, to say, this is why we need to raise funds, because we have Paul here who really has been impacted by our virtual worship. And wouldn't it be great if we could get the equipment in, not only so that Paul can be impacted, but all these other people could also be impacted by what has taken place. So I think that's the other thing it does for you. It allows you to do that sort of work.
Doug, another question comes from a participant that says, our line item budget is primarily 85% in two areas: staff salaries and facility support. It seems to me, says the person, that if those costs become hidden in the narrative budget, we're trying to fool the congregation. Shouldn't we emphasize the mission that is being done and then flat out say these are the costs associated with providing these missions? What are your thoughts about those things?
Absolutely, you could do it. And what you just said. So I want to say that up front. Because the goal of a narrative budget is not to fool the congregation, because again, you're going to be showing the total cost and funding for what is going to take place. So in a narrative budget, I'm just going to use figures. Let's say that the cost for the staff is $75,000 and for facilities is $50,000. So that $125,000 cost is not going to disappear. But what is going to change, at least would be my hope, is to say to the congregation, look, we're spending, as we look at this, $150,000 right now for support, and $25,000 just strictly in sort of ministry. Let's think about how we can increase our ministry giving, or let's look at some of the places where we actually have people possibly volunteering that we're not counting now, that are helping us to do the work of ministry, even though that isn't illustrated in the line item budget. So I look at it in terms of not trying to hide that cost, but really trying to help the congregation to see that those efforts are important and help us to do the ministry. But let's look at, can we even increase our ministry effort and what we're doing as we move forward?
When you do this with churches, do you also share out a line item budget, or do you say, here's the narrative budget, and if you'd like to copy the line item, we have those available for you? How do you do that? What's your suggestion?
Most congregations do the latter. They say, here's the budget. If you would like a copy of the line item, we will absolutely give it to you, because again, the goal is not to hide anything from anyone. There are some congregations who do both. They do the narrative budget and also give out the line item budget with it. So I have seen both done, but the reality is, and I'm sure this is true for most of your churches, when you hold a meeting and give out the line item budget, most of the people, if they don't leave it in their seat after the meeting is over, they throw it away on their way out. So they're not holding on. There are a few. You always have a few, as you know, that are thorn in the side and are going to hold on to it and question everything. But for most of the people, they're not going to hold on to that line item budget anyway. So saying we are happy to provide it for you is going to be enough for most of them. As long as they know you're not trying to hide anything and have it, they're going to be happy.
If there are other questions that people have, you can give them to us and we'll share them. I'm curious of what you've seen, Doug, related to the video creation that the animal shelter used and how you relate that. Would you pull out and do a video on one segment or as a whole? I'm curious, because that was a powerful video, how we can think about doing that in conjunction with narrative budgets.
Yeah, I have seen usually larger congregations use it and use it to sort of, they still, of course, do sort of the paper version, usually a larger one, of course, but they will use a video for the congregation as a whole to sort of tell the story of the impact of the year. They do that because, again, they know that the majority of the people just don't pay attention to the paper. But if you show them a 2-minute video of the impact of the year, after worship or even during a point in time in worship, they're going to pay attention to that video. So that is where I've seen the video being used. So they're doing the same basic concept, but they are, of course, are just putting it in video form.
Yeah. I continue to find that to grow our stewardship, we need to make those personal connections and those stories. And the narrative budget does a great job of connecting us to people. There are no other questions currently. If you do come up with a question, you can always contact us here at the United Methodist Foundation or connect. There's lots of great resources at the Lewis Center for Church Leadership that you can get access to. And I'm assuming Dr. Powe would be willing to help address something if needed.
Absolutely. And I was going to also say that if you go and they have the website in there to churchleadership.com and go to our resources, you'll see leading ideas. You can actually type in narrative budget. And there are some articles on narrative budget, and then there are just in stewardship in general, there are hundreds of articles on stewardship. So and all of these are free resources in terms of the leading ideas articles and also some podcasts on the topic. So those are all free. So please use our website and make use of those resources.
Yeah, and on the homepage, you can sign up your own email address and get the regular distributions of the leading ideas, which I really appreciate. You all send us emails to my email box of great new contemporary thoughts on resources and ministry. Thank you very much for the great work you do with the center. Thank you.
Thank you.
Doug, we're grateful for your presentation and the opportunity to be together. Prayers for everyone in your ministry as you craft budgets for the coming year and work to tell the story of the impact of the ministries of your church. We're grateful that you were able to be with us today. We pray God's blessing to be upon you as you go. Thank you.
Thank you all. I appreciate the time. I enjoyed it. Take care.